A frigate (ffrt) is any of several types of warship, the term having been used for ships of various sizes and roles over the last few centuries. In the 17th century, this term was used for any warship built for speed and maneuverability, the description often used being frigate-built. These could be warships carrying the principal batteries of carriage-mounted guns on a single deck or on two decks. The term was generally used for ships too small to stand in the line of battle, although early line of battle ships were frequently referred to as frigates when they were built for speed. In the 18th century, the term referred to ships that were usually as long as a ship of the line and were square-rigged on all three masts, but were faster and with lighter armament, used for patrolling and escort. In the definition adopted by the British Admiralty, they were rated ships of at least 28 guns, carrying the principal armaments upon a single continuous deck, the upper deck, while ships of the line possessed two or more continuous decks, bearing batteries of guns. In the late 19th century, the armored frigate was a type of ironclad warship that for a time was the most powerful type of vessel afloat. The term frigate was used because such ships still mounted the principal armaments on a single continuous upper deck. The later 19th century battleship thus developed from the frigate rather than from the ship of the line. In modern navies, frigates are used to protect other warships and merchant marine ships, especially as anti-submarine warfare combatants for amphibious expeditionary forces, underway replenishment groups, and merchant convoys. Ship classes dubbed frigates have also more closely resembled corvettes, destroyers, cruisers, and even battleships. The rank frigate captain derives from the name of this type of ship. Age of sail. Origins. The term frigate originated in the Mediterranean in the late 15th century, referring to a lighter galleass-type ship with oars, sails and a light armament, built for speed and maneuverability. The etymology of the word is unknown, although it may have originated as a corruption of ๊frɪɡᵻt, a Latin word for an open vessel with no lower deck. ๊frɪɡᵻt was, in turn, derived from the ancient Greek phrase phi rho alpha capitao micron sigma nu alpha sigma, or undefended ship. In 1583, during the 80 Years' War, Habsburg Spain recovered the southern Netherlands from the rebellious Dutch. This soon led to the occupied ports being used as bases for privateers, the Dunkirkers, to attack the shipping of the Dutch and their allies. To achieve this, they developed small, maneuverable, sail-only vessels that came to be referred to as frigates. The success of these Dunkirk vessels influenced the ship design of the Dutch and other navies contending with them, but because most regular navies required ships of greater endurance than the Dunkirk frigates could provide, the term was soon applied less exclusively to any relatively fast and elegant sail-only warship. In French, the term frigate became a verb meaning to build long and low, and an adjective adding further confusion. Even the huge English sovereign of the seas could be described as a delicate frigate by a contemporary after her upper decks were reduced in 1651. The navy of the Dutch Republic was the first navy to build the larger ocean-going frigates. The Dutch navy had three principal tasks in the struggle against Spain: to protect Dutch merchant ships at sea, to blockade the ports of Spanish-held Flanders to damage trade and halt enemy privateering, and to fight the Spanish fleet and prevent troop landings. The first two tasks required speed, shallowness of draft for the shallow waters around the Netherlands, and the ability to carry sufficient supplies to maintain a blockade. The third task required heavy armament, sufficient to fight against the Spanish fleet. The first of these larger battle-capable frigates were built around 1600 at Hoorn in Holland. By the later stages of the 80 Years' War, the Dutch had switched entirely from the heavier ships still used by the English and Spanish to the lighter frigates, carrying around 40 guns and weighing around 300 tons. The effectiveness of the Dutch frigates became most visible in the Battle of the Downs in 1639, encouraging most other navies, especially the English, to adopt similar designs. The fleets built by the Commonwealth of England in the 1650s generally consisted of ships described as frigates, the largest of which were two-decker great frigates of the third rate, carrying 60 guns. These vessels were as big and capable as great ships of the time. However, most other frigates at the time were used as cruisers, independent fast ships. The term frigate implied a long hull design, which relates directly to speed and also, in turn, helped the development of the broadside tactic in naval warfare. At this time, a further design evolved, reintroducing oars to create the galley frigates such as HMS Charles Galley of 1676, which was rated as a 32-gun fifth rate but also had a bank of 40 oars set below the upper deck, which could be used to propel the ship in the absence of a favorable wind. In Danish, the word frigate is often applied to warships carrying as few as 16 guns, such as HMS Falcon, which the British classified as a sloop under the rating system of the Royal Navy. By the middle of the 18th century, the term frigate was technically restricted to single-decked ships of the fifth rate, though small 28-gun frigates were classed as sixth-rate. Classic design. The classic sailing frigate, well known today for its role in the Napoleonic Wars, can be traced back to French developments in the second quarter of the 18th century. The French-built ʻfrɪɡᵻt of 1740 is often regarded as the first example of this type. These ships were square-rigged and carried all the main guns on a single continuous upper deck. The lower deck, known as the gun deck, now carried no armament, and functioned as a berth deck, where the crew lived, and was in fact placed below the waterline of the new frigates. A total of 59 French sailing frigates were built between 1777 and 1790, with a standard design averaging a hull length of 135 feet and an average draft of 13 feet. The new frigates recorded sailing speeds of up to 14 knots, significantly faster than the predecessor vessels. They were able to fight with all the guns when the seas were so rough that comparable two-deckers had to close the gun ports on the lower decks. Like the larger 74, which was developed at the same time, the new frigates sailed well and were good fighting vessels due to a combination of long hulls and low upperworks compared to vessels of comparable size and firepower. The Royal Navy captured a handful of the new French frigates during the War of the Austrian Succession and were impressed by them, particularly for their inshore handling capabilities. They soon built copies and started to adapt the type to their own needs, setting the standard for other frigates as the leading naval power. The first British frigates carried 28 guns, including an upper-deck battery of 24 9-pounder guns, but soon developed into fifth-rate ships of 32 or 36 guns, including an upper-deck battery of 26 12-pounder guns, with the remaining 6 or 10 smaller guns carried on the quarterdeck and forecastle. From around 1778, a larger, heavy frigate was developed with a main battery of 26 or 28 18-pounder guns. Both British and American frigates frigates could additionally carry smaller carriage-mounted guns on their quarterdecks and forecastles. Technically rated ships with fewer than 28 guns could not be classed as frigates but as post ships. However, in common parlance most post ships were often described as frigates, the same casual misuse of the term being extended to smaller two-decked ships that were too small to stand in the line of battle. Royal Navy frigates of the late 18th century included the 1780 vintage Perseverance class, which measured around 900 tons burden and carried 36 guns. This successful class was followed by numerous other classes that measured over 1,000 tons burden and carried 38 guns. Heavy frigates. In 1797, 3 of the United States Navy's first 6 major ships were rated as 44-gun frigates, which operationally carried 56 to 60 24-pounder long guns and 32-pounder or 42-pounder carronades on 2 decks. By all regards they were exceptionally powerful and tough. These ships were so well armed that they were often regarded as equal to ships of the line, and after a series of losses at the outbreak of the War of 1812, Royal Navy fighting instructions ordered British frigates to never engage American frigates at any less than or 2-to-1 advantage. US Constitution, preserved as a museum ship by the U.S. Navy, is the oldest commissioned warship afloat, and is a surviving example of a frigate from the Age of Sail. Constitution and her sister ships President and United States were created in a response to deal with the Barbary Coast pirates and in conjunction with the Naval Act of 1794. The 3 big frigates, when built, had a distinctive building pattern which minimized hogging and improves hydrodynamic efficiency. The hull was designed so that all the weight from the guns was upon the keel itself. Joshua Humphreys proposed that only live oak, a tree that grew only in America, should be used to build these ships. The method was to use diagonal riders, 8 on each side, that sat at a 45-degree angle. These beams of live oak were about 2 feet wide and around a foot thick and helped to maintain the shape of the hull, serving also to reduce flexibility and to minimize impacts. These ideas were considered revolutionary in the late 18th and early 19th century. A 3-layer method was used in which the planks along the sides of the hull were laid horizontally across the ribs, making a crossing a checkerboard pattern. The sides of the ship could be as thick as 25 inches, and were able to absorb substantial damage. The strength of this braced construction earned US Constitution the nickname Old Ironsides. Roll frigates were perhaps the hardest worked of warship types during the Age of Sail. While smaller than a ship of the line, they were formidable opponents for the large numbers of sloops and gunboats, not to mention privateers and merchantmen, able to carry 6 months' stores. They had very long range, and vessels larger than frigates were considered too valuable to operate independently. Frigates scouted for the fleet, went on commerce raiding missions and patrols, and conveyed messages and dignitaries. Usually, frigates would fight in small numbers or singly against other frigates. They would avoid contact with ships of the line. Even in the midst of a fleet engagement, it was bad etiquette for a ship of the line to fire on an enemy frigate which had not fired first. Frigates were involved in fleet battles, often as repeating frigates. In the smoke and confusion of battle, signals made by the fleet commander, whose flagship might be in the thick of the fighting, might be missed by the other ships of the fleet. Frigates were therefore stationed to windward or leeward of the main line of battle, and had to maintain a clear line of sight to the commander's flagship. Signals from the flagship were then repeated by the frigates, which themselves standing out of the line and clear from the smoke and disorder of battle, could be more easily seen by the other ships of the fleet. If damage or loss of masts prevented the flagship from making clear conventional signals, the repeating frigates could interpret them and hoist their own in the correct manner, passing on the commander's instructions clearly. For officers in the Royal Navy, a frigate was a desirable posting. Frigates often saw action, which meant a greater chance of glory, promotion, and prize money. Unlike larger ships that were placed in ordinary, frigates were kept in service in peacetime as a cost-saving measure and to provide experience to frigate captains and officers which would be useful in wartime. Frigates could also carry marines for boarding enemy ships or for operations on shore. In 1832, the frigate Potomac landed a party of 282 sailors and marines ashore in the U.S. Navy's first Sumatran expedition. Common armament was one gun deck with 24 to 30 long guns, from 8 to 24-pounders, with up to a dozen light guns or carronades on the quarterdeck and forecastle above. Frigates remained a crucial element of navies until the mid-19th century. The first ironclads were classified as frigates because of the number of guns they carried. However, terminology changed as iron and steam became the norm, and the role of the frigate was assumed first by the protected cruiser and then by the light cruiser. Frigates are often the vessel of choice in historical naval novels due to the relative freedom compared to ships of the line and smaller vessels. For example, the Patrick O'Brian Aubrey Maturin series, C.S. Forrester's Horatio Hornblower series and Alexander Kent's Richard Bolitho series. The motion picture Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World features a reconstructed historic frigate HMS Rose, to depict Aubrey's frigate HMS Surprise. Age of steam. Vessels classed as frigates continued to play a great role in navies with the adoption of steam power in the 19th century. In the 1830s, navies experimented with large paddle steamers equipped with large guns mounted on one deck, which were termed paddle frigates. For the mid-1840s frigates which more closely resembled the traditional sailing frigate were built with steam engines and screw propellers. These screw frigates, built first of wood and later of iron, continued to perform the traditional role of the frigate until late in the 19th century. Armored frigate. From 1859, armor was added to ships based on existing frigate and ship-of-the-line designs. The additional weight of the armor on these first ironclad warships meant that they could have only one gun deck, and they were technically frigates, even though they were more powerful than existing ships of the line and occupied the same strategic role. The phrase armored frigate remained in use for some time to denote a sail-equipped broadside-firing type of ironclad. After 1875, the term frigate fell out of use. Vessels with armored sides were designated as battleships or armored cruisers, while protected cruisers only possessed an armored deck, and unarmored vessels, including frigates and sloops, were classified as unprotected cruisers. Second World War. Modern frigates are related to earlier frigates only by name. The term frigate was re-adopted during the Second World War by the British Royal Navy to describe an anti-submarine escort vessel that was larger than a corvette, smaller than a destroyer, and about equal in size and capability to the American destroyer escort. Anti-submarine escorts had previously been classified as sloops by the Royal Navy, and the Black Swan-class sloops of 1939 to 1945 were as large as the new types of frigate and more heavily armed. 22 of these were reclassified as frigates after the war, as were the remaining 24 smaller Castle-class corvettes. The frigate was introduced to remedy some of the shortcomings inherent in the corvette design. limited armament, a hull form not suited to open ocean work, a single shaft which limited speed and maneuverability, and a lack of range. The frigate was designed and built to the same mercantile construction standards as the corvette, allowing manufacture by yards unused to warship construction. The first frigates of the River class were essentially two sets of corvette machinery in one larger hull, armed with the latest Hedgehog anti-submarine weapon. The frigate possessed less offensive firepower and speed than a destroyer, but such qualities were not required for anti-submarine warfare. Submarines were slow while submerged, and Aztec sets did not operate effectively at speeds of over 20 knots. Rather, the frigate was an austere and weatherly vessel suitable for mass construction and fitted with the latest innovations in anti-submarine warfare. As the frigate was intended purely for convoy duties, and not to deploy with the fleet, it had limited range and speed. The contemporary German Flottenbergleiter, also known as F-boats, were essentially frigates. They were based on a pre-war Oberkommando der Marine concept of vessels which could fill roles such as fast minesweeper, minelayer, merchant escort and anti-submarine vessel. Because of the Treaty of Versailles, the displacement was officially limited to 600 tons, although in reality they exceeded this by about 100 tons. F-boats had two stacks and two 105 mm gun turrets. The design was flawed because of its narrow beam, sharp bow and unreliable high-pressure steam turbines. F-boats were succeeded in operational duties by Type 35 and Elbing-class torpedo boats. Flottenbergleiter remained in service as advanced training vessels. It was not until the Royal Navy's Bay class of 1944 that a British design classified as a frigate was produced for fleet use, although it still suffered from limited speed. These anti-aircraft frigates, built on incomplete Lock-class frigate hulls, were similar to the United States Navy's destroyer escorts, although the latter had greater speed and offensive armament to better suit them to fleet deployments. The destroyer escort concept came from design studies by the General Board of the United States Navy in 1940, as modified by requirements established by a British commission in 1941 prior to the American entry into the war for deep-water escorts. The American-built destroyer escorts serving in the British Royal Navy were rated as Captain-class frigates. The U.S. Navy's two Canadian-built Asheville-class and 96 British-influenced, American-built Tacoma-class frigates that followed originally were classified as patrol gunboats in the U.S. Navy, but on the 15th of April 1943 were all reclassified as patrol frigates.